No one expected the Daystar controversy to spiral into one of the most talked about ministry scandals of the year. Yet here we are, standing in the middle of a storm that refuses to settle. The newest wave of allegations did not come quietly or politely. It came like a crack in a stained glass window, sharp enough to cut through the polished image that the ministry has been known for. The internet did not invent this story. It merely amplified what several people say has been whispered, suppressed, denied, or dismissed behind closed doors for far too long. And the moment eyewitness testimony emerged alleging that Joshua Brown was seen in uncomfortable proximity to the Lamb's young daughter, an allegation he firmly denies, the public's attention turned sharply toward one person, Joanie Lamb. Because according to those close to the situation, she reportedly became the one defending him, positioning herself between the allegations and the accused, and insisting that what others interpreted as inappropriate did not happen at all. But while the public saw polished statements and calm responses, the people closest to the story saw something very different. A family under pressure, employees afraid of speaking out, and a culture where telling the truth was not encouraged but quietly discouraged. And before we go any further, if you're watching this and trying to make sense of everything unfolding, make sure you subscribe and share your thoughts. Because what we're about to unpack isn't casual drama. It's a collision between testimony, denial, and the complex inner workings of a ministry empire. It all begins with Sylvia, a longtime employee, someone who spent enough time in the Lamb household to understand the rhythm, the tension, and the quiet expectations that governed it. Her testimony didn't come out as a dramatic performance or a sensational accusation. It came out with the hesitation of someone who had carried a burden silently for too long. Sylvia said she witnessed behavior from Joshua Brown toward the young child that made her uncomfortable. Behavior she described as crossing boundaries. Behavior she believed a parent would not overlook if they saw it themselves. She didn't embellish her words. She didn't use dramatic language. She simply stated what she saw and why it bothered her. But what makes her testimony even more significant is what she said next. She was afraid to speak up inside that house. She feared her job would be taken from her. She feared backlash. She feared that telling the truth could come with consequences. And that fear says more about the environment than the incident itself. Because when someone fears retaliation for raising a concern involving a child, the question becomes less about what happened and more about why the system around them discouraged accountability. But one person's fear usually points to something bigger. And in this case, it pointed to the growing division inside the Lamb family. According to multiple accounts, the family began to fracture the moment Jonathan and Susie raised their own concerns about Joshua Brown. They were not outsiders. They were not employees. They were family. Yet that didn't shield them from the tension that followed. Reports describe that after bringing up their concerns, the couple found themselves pushed out of their leadership roles, distanced from family circles, and treated as though they were the ones causing the problem instead of trying to prevent one. Their relationship with Joanie became strained, mistrust grew, and what once was presented as a united front to the world started cracking internally in ways no PR strategy could fully repair. Here's where the story gets even more complicated. Because Sylvia wasn't the only one with concerns. The allegations that surfaced weren't isolated to one moment or one location. Multiple accounts mentioned two primary incidents, one at a beach house and another at a swimming pool. These separate accounts created a pattern, or at the very least, a repeated concern about boundaries that multiple people interpreted in a similar way. It is important to clarify again. Joshua Brown denies these allegations completely. He says nothing happened. He says the concerns are misunderstandings. He says the situations were misread and misinterpreted. That is his stance. But the existence of multiple testimonies from multiple sources, describing moments that made them uneasy, this creates a conflict between what was seen by witnesses and what is being denied by the person at the center of it. And this is where Joanie Lamb steps into the narrative in full force. According to those who saw the internal dynamics unfold, she defended Josh. She rejected the accusations. She dismissed the interpretations. And in doing so, she positioned herself in direct opposition to the witnesses, including her own family members. To critics, this wasn't just a disagreement, it was a message. A message that suggested the ministry's image mattered more than uncomfortable truths. A message that signaled who held the real power behind the scenes. A message that implied speaking up was not the righteous thing to do, but the rebellious thing to do. And that message, whether intended or not, began shaping the culture of silence people now describe inside Daystar. Some critics argue that the silence surrounding this situation did not come from spiritual loyalty at all, but from something far more practical and far more powerful: financial dependence. They suggest that many people connected to the ministry, including close family members, were deeply tied to the Daystar system in ways that went beyond simple employment. Their mortgages, their salaries, their travel perks, their positions, and in many cases, their entire lifestyles were linked directly to the ministry structure. For people in that kind of environment, speaking out doesn't feel like a brave act, it feels like a financial suicide mission. If your home is tied to your cooperation, if your income is tied to your loyalty, and if your stability depends on staying in good standing with leadership, then raising concerns becomes more than risky. It becomes dangerous. One wrong move could lead to losing favor. Losing favor could lead to losing income. Losing income could lead to losing your home. And losing your home could destabilize your entire life. In a system like that, silence is not about spiritual belief or moral conviction. Silence becomes a means of survival. And when survival depends on keeping quiet, the door opens for corruption, whether moral, spiritual, emotional, or structural, to grow uninterrupted. This alleged financial dependency creates a darker, more troubling context for understanding why people didn't speak up sooner, why witnesses hesitated, and why the internal conflict escalated in the painful way it did. For many working close to the inner circle, the ministry wasn't just a job, it was their livelihood, their stability, their identity, and in some cases their entire financial foundation. Employees reportedly understood exactly how the culture operated. Loyalty was rewarded generously, often with trips, influence, public visibility, and a sense of elevated status within the ministry's world. Staying in good standing came with comfort and protection, but questioning leadership, that came with risks some described as nothing short of devastating. And these weren't hypothetical risks. According to accounts circulating online, even board members signed NDAs, formal reminders that transparency was not expected, and silence was not only preferred but required. Once you signed, you understood the rules. You speak when allowed and you stay quiet when expected. That reinforced a sobering message. Truth could be expensive, and honesty could cost you your place. The phrase whispered among insiders captured the atmosphere with chilling accuracy. There is a price of silence. Behind that line lies an entire structure where comfort was traded for conscience, and peace, at least the outward appearance of peace, was purchased at the expense of truth. The internal. Eventually, the tension reached a point where it could no longer remain internal. Law enforcement became involved and police interviews began. These interviews introduced new voices, new witnesses, who supported what Jonathan and Susie had been saying from the beginning. Their statements were consistent and unsettling. They described a clear pattern: pressure to stay quiet, subtle warnings about upsetting leadership, indirect signals that certain topics were simply off-limits, and a long-standing culture that discouraged questioning anything involving the inner circle. Some mentioned that NDAs created hesitation and fear. Others recalled being told, quietly but very clearly, that speaking out would be unwise. And several insisted that the uncomfortable interactions they witnessed were not misunderstandings, not exaggerations, and not misinterpretations. They were real, and they still remembered them vividly. But even as these accounts multiplied, even as the pressure mounted, Joshua Brown's denial remained unwavering. He insisted that nothing inappropriate ever occurred. That firm denial created one of the most emotionally charged conflicts imaginable. Multiple witnesses stating they saw deeply concerning behavior, and the accused insisting the events never happened at all. It forced the truth into a space between conflicting testimonies, fears, loyalties, interpretations, and years of internal dynamics the public is only now beginning to understand. And this is where the story becomes even more complicated. When the individuals raising concerns include longtime employees, close family members, and people who gain nothing by coming forward, people who in fact risk their careers, their stability, and their relationships to speak up, the conversation takes on a different gravity. It no longer looks like gossip. It no longer looks like misunderstanding. It looks like a painful unraveling of long-buried tension that had been held together by silence, loyalty, and fear. The emotional weight of this scandal stretches far beyond a single accusation. It touches a family that once appeared united. It shakes a ministry that once presented itself as impenetrable. Critics now argue that inside Daystar, loyalty meant safety and honesty meant risk, and for many, survival meant silence. The deeper this story goes, the more it feels like silence wasn't accidental. It was shaped, reinforced, and protected by a system that benefited from keeping difficult truths buried. So now the questions are bigger than any single moment or allegation. What does all of this mean for Daystar moving forward? What happens when witness testimonies, family divisions, leaked information, and public scrutiny all collide at once? How long can leadership remain quiet? And what happens when silence begins to sound like avoidance rather than clarity? And with the internet amplifying every new detail, every contradiction, every testimony, how long before the pressure forces a breakthrough? The public is watching. Former employees are speaking. Family fractures are visible. And the demand for transparency is only growing louder. What happens next will shape not only the ministry's future but its legacy. Share your thoughts below. Do you believe the witnesses? Do you believe the denials? Do you think the internal structure influenced how this was handled? And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives and ongoing updates.